Hello everyone. Today we will be reading from A Good Housekeeping magazine, published in June of 1964. We're going to be reading a story called One Long Night in a Baby Hospital. Nurse writes up detailed reports as coffee pot stands guard against drowsiness. Just being away from home can frighten a sick child, but fears don't last long when confided to a sympathetic ear. Around the clock, the ceaseless battle goes on. The reward to bring health and happiness into many precious little lives. By Evan McLeod Wiley. The needs of a sick child do not end when night falls. In hospitals across the nation, the battle for children's lives and health goes on around the clock. The scope of that battle is revealed by these glimpses of a single night at the Babies Hospital in New York City, one of America's great institutions and the first to be founded exclusively for the care of sick children. Our story begins in early evening as the hands of the clock point to 7. Is that a little better, Billy? Eyes tight shut, the pale-faced, dark-haired boy, supported in the hospital bed in a semi-sitting position, manages a faint nod of acknowledgement. In the murky twilight of a rainy evening, the small room on the 6th floor of Babies Hospital would appear only as one of many clusters of oblong light illuminating the tall buildings of the great medical center overlooking the Hudson River in Upper Manhattan. Here, high above the crowds of hurrying commuters, flickering neon signs and roaring buses, two women work swiftly together, adjusting plastic tubes leading from bottles of dark blood and fluids suspended from intravenous stands beside the boy's bed. The younger of the two wears the blue striped uniform of a student nurse. The other is a trim-figured, white, uniformed redhead whose every move reflects the deft precision of a seasoned professional. There is nothing more satisfying than helping a child forget illness and loneliness. Dominating all else in the room is the steady, rhythmic whine and suction sound of a mechanical pump on the floor near the bed. From the pump, a large red rubber tube coils upward to a chest respirator, which encases the boy from neck to thighs. At 3-second intervals, the powerful pump causes his chest to expand, sucking in drafts of pure oxygen from the long green tubes which fork into his nostrils. A young doctor acting chief resident for the night ducks into the room. "How's he doing, Annie?" "He's just making it, Mike," the white uniformed supervising nurse replies. "Temperature still 101, pulse 120. This afternoon, the resident says, we could still hear plenty of pneumonia crackling around in his chest. He's number one on my trouble card for tonight. The life of this child is hanging in balance tonight, imperiled by cystic fibrosis, a debilitating and frequently fatal disease. Cysts in his lungs cause the formation of a thick fluid which his body lacks the ability to dissolve by manufacturing the proper enzymes. For 7 years, since shortly after birth, his life has been endangered by episodes of acute illness. Each time, Baby's Hospital, which pioneered in the identification and treatment of this disease, has been able to help him overcome it. Yesterday, he was again admitted as an emergency case, coughing and gasping for breath and running a high fever. Artificial enzymes, antibiotics, oxygen and blood transfusions, and now the respirator are being used to try to check the attack. Everywhere at Baby's may be seen the tremendous strides that have taken place in saving lives and restoring ailing and malformed children to full health. 75 years ago, when the hospital was founded by 5 New York women, it consisted of 8 beds in a rented house staffed by 1 doctor and a handful of nurses. Since then, Baby's has grown into a part of the huge Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. It has treated more than 1 million children. Its physicians, surgeons, and nurses routinely employ a host of new advances in medicine and surgery. Valerie, a little girl in a pink house coat, skipping happily down a 9th floor corridor, hand in hand with a student nurse, bears only a neat, pink-lined scar on her right side to reveal how she was snatched back from certain death. A few minutes after her birth, an alert delivery room nurse, noting her gurgling gasps for breath, hastily summoned doctors. They discovered that a gap between Valerie's windpipe and esophagus was permitting choking fluids to pour into her lungs. She was kept alive for 6 months by a feeding tube that led directly into her stomach until she was strong enough for surgeons to begin a series of corrective operations. In a few days, she will be departing from the hospital to lead a completely normal life. Only a score of years ago, every child born with this little girl's affliction was doomed to die. Now 3 out of 4 can be made perfectly well. Similarly, other children here at Baby's tonight are recuperating from radically new operations which will correct the devastating defects of cleft palates, hair lips, club feet, and other major congenital abnormalities. 8 p.m. At a table in a ward, a small boy in pajamas and a baseball cap sits in deep concentration beside a man in a blue jacket. "What game are you two playing?" asks a passing doctor. "We're not playing," replies the youngster indigently. "We're working. We're making clowns, aren't we, Mr. Cooper?" "We sure are, Harry," Cooper answers as he shows the little boy how to twist colored pipe cleaners into tiny human figures. Businessman Cooper is one of dozens of volunteers who serve in the hospital's TLC, Tender Loving Care, recreation and school programs. From supper time until bedtime, he roams the wards, sitting with bedridden children, telling stories and teaching youngsters how to make miniature clowns, baseball players, and the dancers. Although at this hour most of the parents have departed, on the floors reserved for infants and toddlers, a corps of pink ladies, volunteers in pink smocks, sit in rocking chairs, bottle feeding, cuddling, and rocking tiny patients to sleep. Other volunteers visit the hospital in the daytime to bring the children a wondrous world of puppet shows and musical shows, or join with them in their games, hobbies, or school lessons. Now, swathed in mist and gusts of rain, the rooftop playground usually swarms with children cycling, romping, and swinging. In an adjacent schoolroom, now deserted, save for a force of cleaners, boys and girls grapple with arithmetic and spelling. In the hobby shop, under volunteers' supervision, youngsters sawing, hammering, sandpapering, and gluing turn out wooden boats, model airplanes, and scrapbooks that they can display proudly to their floor nurses and parents. "I've found out," says one volunteer, "that there is nothing more satisfying in life than helping a child to forget illness and loneliness." Much that has been learned about children in hospitals is being put to use at babies, says Dr. Edward Kernan, Jr., the hospital's director. "We know today how important it is to cushion a child's hospitalization with extended daily visiting hours which keep him in close contact with his parents, and with the wonderful help we get from our volunteers. We're also come to realize that there is one great difference between a child and an adult in the hospital. With the adults, it's primarily just a matter of making them as well as they were before they became ill. But a child, even though he is in a hospital, is constantly learning and growing. Children learn what they live. If a child is with us for any significant length of time, we must try not only to make him well, but also to take him forward, as he might progress if he were not sick. Whether he learns how to build a toy boat or how to make new friends and get along better with other children and grown-ups, it's all on the side of progress." 9:40 p.m. The familiar bluster of Phil Silvers emanating from a ceiling-hung television set brings a faint smile to a boy who lies in a compact chamber as bizarre as a space capsule or nuclear submarine. This is the open heart recovery room of the medical center. It is crammed with emergency electronic equipment, yellow breathing packs, brilliantly hued anesthesia tanks, oxygen tents, and steel cabinets full of special drugs. Nurses are never more than 10 feet from special red wall phones, which will bring medical rescue teams on the run. Glass panels recessed in the wall at the head of each patient's bed contain dials, gauges, and glass tubes bubbling with fluids. On the screens of portable electrocardiograph machines, bouncing yellow dots provide a continuous visual picture of each patient's heartbeat. Vital sign wall graphs record his temperature, blood pressure, and respiration in bold colors. To this room are brought the center patients who have just undergone the most dramatic of operations, the actual penetration and repair of a human heart. The boy who is watching the Phil Silvers show, as nurses moisten his lips with gauze pads, was born with an imperfect heart. As he grew older, he could not run, jump, bike, or play games with other children without blacking out from lack of oxygen. Last week, upon his admission to Baby's Hospital, a highly skilled team in the cardiovascular laboratory threaded a hollow tube smaller than the lead of a pencil through a vein in his arm until its tip reached directly into his heart. Their studies enabled them to determine the nature of his abnormality and recommend its repair by open heart surgery. Yesterday, during an incredibly delicate operation that continued without a break for 9 hours, surgeons opened his chest and connected his lungs and circulatory system to a heart-lung machine. With the machine substituting for these organs, they laid open the boy's heart, closed off a hole between two of its pumping chambers with a permanent plastic patch, and removed an obstruction that was blocking the flow of blood to his lungs. Brought directly from the operating table to this chamber, he has been watched moment by moment ever since for signs of a crisis. Within 24 hours, however, he has shown dramatic improvement. The blue color that tinged his face when he was brought to the hospital has been replaced by pink tones as his strengthened heart brings to his entire body a strength and vitality he has never known before. If all continues to go well, he will be returned in a few days to a room on the 6th floor of Babies to complete his convalescence and look forward to living a full life. His best friends may be baffled by the changes in him, comments one of the doctors. The fact that kids like this no longer get out of breath and can keep up with the rest of the children sometimes changes their whole personality. They become real tigers. Midnight in the medical center's Vanderbilt Clinic, open 24 hours a day for emergency treatment and diagnosis. A young woman doctor in a white coat wearily brushes the hair back from her eyes. Daughter of a Chicago pediatrician, she is now learning the specialty at Baby's Hospital. Tonight, her assignment is Station 10 in the Vanderbilt Clinic, treating and diagnosing a steady stream of sick infants and children who are brought in by parents or relatives. When you get a chance, Marjorie, she says to the young blonde nurse who is assisting her, ask the desk to order me a chocolate soda. Who's next? The little cute boy who was brought in by his mother, the nurse replies. He has a temperature of 101. She says he's been sick for 4 days. I've got him set up in number 4 for your examination. His name is Travers. 12:03 a.m. Together, the two young women enter a high-ceilinged chamber. In one corner, a tiny infant, 28 days old, lies motionless on a sheet-covered table. His young mother, worried, weary, but still controlled, strokes his forehead. He hasn't been good since last weekend, she tells the doctor. First he had the shakes and was vomiting. Now he just lies still until he has one of those spells. What kind of spells? Asks the doctor. A sort of shaking and then a kind of spasm which makes him put his head way back. I wanted to bring him in Sunday, but the family talked me out of it. They said I'd forgotten babies are always getting sick and getting better. Monday he seemed better and slept a lot, so I thought they were probably right. The doctor has been running her hands over the baby, looking into his eyes, pressing gently on his head. The lines around his mouth have tightened. I think your little boy may be quite sick, she said gently to the worried mother. I'm going to get the nurse to bring a form for you to sign so I can do a spinal tap right away. I want to check the fluid in his back. To the nurse, she says in a low voice, it may be meningitis. The nurse's eyes widen. Oh my gosh, she whispers, the poor kid. As the mother signs the form, the nurse wheels over a dressing cart. The doctor drops to a low stool and snaps on rubber gloves. With the nurse cradling the naked child in her arms to hold him absolutely still, the doctor slips a small, hollow, hypodermic needle into the lower part of his back. At first, the needle is dry. Then suddenly, from it pours a thin stream of turbid yellow fluid. The young doctor, catching the fluid in the test tube, is unable to suppress a sharp exclamation of dismay. Oh, no, no, this isn't good at all. Marjorie, we've got a bad case here. Hold him tight. I've got to get more fluid. The labs are going to need it for tests. 12:07 a.m. The red-headed night supervising nurse pokes her head into the examining room. Don't mind me, she says cheerfully. I'm just saying good night, going off duty in a few minutes. Everything here all right? The young doctor is still in deep distress. No, Annie, it's not. I'm so glad you came by. I think we've got a bad case here. Look at the spinal fluid. The supervising nurse's glance is swift. The color is terrible, she says. Stay right where you are. I'll set up an emergency admission. In a flash, she is at the clinic admitting desk. Put the chief resident on emergency page. Tell him we're coming up to baby's 8 with a probable meningitis case. Boy, 28 days old. Call the 8th floor desk and tell the girls I said to move the Lewis baby out of room 23 into the ward and give a meningitis team ready for us. Give me an admission chart number for this baby. Any number. Quickly. Honey, quickly. Returning to the examining room, she says, they'll be waiting for us. Give me the baby. I'll take him up myself. Marjorie, you'd better close this room until an orderly has a chance to hose it down and change all the linens. Turning to the bewildered mother, she says, "You come with me. We're going to get your baby treated." With the blanket-swaddled child in her arms, she heads for the elevators. 12:10 a.m. As the supervising nurse and a sick child's mother emerge on the 8th floor at Babies, they are met by a special team of masked and gowned doctors and nurses. As they work at a blinding pace, the baby is weighed, tagged, and placed in a crib. Doctors bend over him, taking nose and throat cultures with cotton swabs for laboratory analysis. Nurses hurry in with dressing trays, intravenous feeding stands, bottles of antibiotic drugs. His weight is 4 kilos, a nurse reports. "All right," the chief resident says to the doctors working with him. "Figure 150 per kilo on your fluids. We can always readjust. Let's get the stuff started into him. I'm drawing 10 cc's of blood for the lab. Put it down that we owe him that much. Hal, you grab those spinal fluid samples and get started in the lab. I'll be there as soon as we get everything going." Discipline and training take over as the doctors and nurses move at top speed in the little room. If this baby does have meningitis, it is a genuine medical emergency. 15 or 20 minutes in commencement of treatment can make the difference between death, permanent brain damage, or a complete recovery. 12:29 a.m. The chief resident backs away from the crib, stripping off his contaminated blue gown and mask, scrubbing with a germ-killing antiseptic, pausing in the doorway to eye critically the intravenous tubes and bottles his team is adjusting. "We're all hooked up in 19 minutes anyways," he says. "Keep that stuff pouring into him. I'm going down to the laboratory to see what Hal has found." He hastens down a back stairway along a darkened corridor to a brightly lit laboratory, where the other young doctor is squinting into a microscope. "What do you see?" he asked. "Plenty. Take a look for yourself." The chief resident adjusts the microscope and peers briefly into it, perceiving immediately the large number of white blood cells which ordinarily would not be present in the spinal fluid. "Damn it," he says. "Why did they wait so long to bring him in?" The chart notes say the family thought he was getting better. Hal says he was sleeping a lot. "He was going into a coma," the chief resident replies. "That's what he was doing. I better get back up there right now." 12:55 a.m. The emergency team still clusters around the bed of little Trevor's. The night supervising nurse, her plans to go off duty at midnight long since forgotten, is still working with them. "How is he, Annie?" the chief resident asks as he returns from the laboratory. "Not doing too well, Mike," she answers. "He's gone into Shane Stokes. Labored breathing," the floor doctor says. "We've got the oxygen started. Give him caffeine, 25 milligrams, Joe," the chief resident says as he scrubs and gets into a fresh mask and gown the nurses hand him. "Has a respirator been ordered?" "It's on its way over right now," the supervising nurse says. "So are the X-ray unit and the blood bank wagon." "His heart is now down to 40, the floor doctor reports. "I don't think we can wait for the bird to get here." "If he won't breathe for us," says the chief resident, "we'll breathe for him. Get a breathing bag ready." While a nurse supports the baby's head, the two young doctors kneel on the floor beside the crib, one puffing gently into a plastic tube inserted into the baby's throat, the other listening intently with stethoscope to determine whether the tube is reaching the lungs or merely inflating the infant's stomach. With the tube positioned correctly, they connect the rubber bag to the oxygen hose and squeeze it rhythmically, breathing for him. Now a portable green respirator is rolled into the crowded room, and the team links its tubing and mouthpieces to the baby's lungs. The rhythmic whine of the machine takes over. The doctors strip off their masks and sweat-soaked gowns and wipe the perspiration from their faces. Scrubbing again at the sink, the chief resident says to a student nurse, "I want you to keep your hands moving on that kid. Rub his face, rub his stomach, rub his feet. Keep him stimulated. I'm going to be just one door away in the next room. If he starts to slip, just yell. Do you understand? Yell your head off." With the other doctor, he goes into a darkened room where the baby's mother sits crying and trembling, trying to sip the coffee the nurses have brought her. "It's going to be touch and go," the chief resident says to her gently. "Trevor's is a very sick little guy, but we'll fight for him." The young mother nods numbly, hands clasped in prayer, as she stares out the window at the rain-swept city. "They told me at home he must be getting better. I knew he wasn't. I knew there was something wrong, but I never thought it was anything like this. Oh my God, not this." 1:20 a.m. Plastic tubes filled with transfusing blood form red garlands around the white sheets of the crib in which little Travers lies, the fingers of one tiny hand twitching fitfully. The student nurse's hands move ceaselessly over his tiny body, and the respirator whines rhythmically. The X-ray technician has finished taking plates of the infant's head and is leaving. "Breathe, little feller," he whispered, bending over the crib. "Breathe." 2:15 a.m. Blue ultraviolet lights in the corridor add to the illumination of the second floor of the hospital, to which night never comes. This is the preemie nursery for all the premature babies born at the medical center, as well as those brought by ambulance from other hospitals in the city. Here are tiny human beings, some of them weighing no more than a loaf of bread, many of their muscles and internal organs still not yet completely formed, too weak to kick or squirm, unable to control their own body temperature, unable to cough or suck to fight for life like a normal baby. Until recently, the chances of life for these little ones were slim. Now, thanks to research projects at Babies Hospital and other children's hospitals, many will survive. Each glassed-in chamber holds half a dozen individual plexiglass incubators. Nurses watching the infants who lie naked within their isolates can use intercom speakers to cry for instant help. To protect the babies from infection, only the gloved hands of the doctors and nurses thrust through armholes in the isolates touch them. As the chief resident and his assistant open the glass door of one of these chambers, A blast of air greets them to drive away corridor germs. At a deep sink just inside, they scrub and then don sterile gowns and masks and gloves before they approach the special installation in this chamber. The box, a specially designed incubator respirator, the only one of its kind in the world, which is breathing for its preemies as well as isolating him from germs and temperature changes. This child, born 48 hours earlier, was very sick at birth and has hovered between life and death ever since. His liver, not yet functioning properly, is not preventing a dangerous buildup of bile pigment in his blood. If the pigment mounts higher, it may cause brain damage. He's still too damn yellow, the resident says. Working through the armholes in the incubator sides, they draw a tiny blood sample from a foot no larger than a teaspoon and proceed to a laboratory. The sample is pipetted into a test tube and whirled in a centrifuge which separates the blood serum. The doctors compare the serum, yellow, with an excess of bile pigment, with clear fluid. Then, using pencil and paper and a calculating machine, they reach a figure. The bile level is still holding at 15, just sitting there, Mike. The other doctor says, maybe it won't go higher. Maybe the kid's liver is coming in to take over and drive it down. We'll do another count at 6 a.m., the resident says. Tell the operating room to stand by for an exchange transfusion until then. 2:45 a.m. From the operating room desk comes a message. OR says they just got a call from the clinic. They've just admitted a boy with acute appendicitis. Dr. Thurman will do the operation, but he wants to know who's going to assist him. Go ahead and scrub, Hal, the chief resident says. I want to watch that meningitis case, and I've got the cystic fibrosis boy still in the respirator. 3 a.m. Back on the 6th floor, Billy, the boy with cystic fibrosis, seems to be sleeping soundly, despite the noisy, encumbering chest respirator. Eyes roaming from the boy to the chart kept by the special nurse at his bedside, the chief resident says, His tone is better. I can see that right away. His pulse is now 105, doctor, the nurse says. His pressure 10 minutes ago was 120/90, and his temperature is down to 100. We're getting there, the resident says, but I want to get another 250 cc's of blood into him. Keep the fluids going and keep him sleeping. If he wakes up, tell him to let himself go. Think about a ball game. Tell him if he sleeps until 7, I'll buy him a seat in the bleachers. 3:20 a.m. There's a rush of spraying water in the antechamber of the operating room as Hal joins the young surgeon who will do the appendectomy. Together they scrub painstakingly and enter the brightly lit operating room, letting the nurses assist them into gowns, masks, and gloves as they stare at the 10-year-old boy who lies naked on the table. The anesthesiologist has already put him to sleep, and now the surgeon, taking a swab from the scrub nurse, paints the boy's abdomen with an orange-colored antiseptic solution and methodically clamps the sterile towels to cover all but a small square of the midsection. Did you have any trouble with this kid, Bert? The surgeon asked the anesthesiologist. Not a bit. He's a cool one. He just lay there quietly with his glasses on. You could have left them on him, I think, the surgeon says, prodding a small square of exposed abdomen with a forefinger. I think this is an acute appendix, but I'd bet $5 there's been no perforation. I think if I make a standard McBurney incision, we'll hit it right on the button. Hold him right there where you've got him, Bert, and we'll go right in. With a scalpel, he makes a small cut, diagonally down from the navel. The bleeders are clamped and tied, and he proceeds carefully through the nearly fatless muscle layer and into the abdomen. He inserts a forefinger and draws forth a small, pinkish, elongated organ. Well now, how about that? He exclaims. It almost popped out by itself. Diagnosis confirmed. Inflamed appendix. Pretty hot, but not ready to pop. There is a little fluid in the abdominal cavity, but we can handle it. Suction, please. A silver suction tube draws off the fluid as the appendix is clamped, sutured, and severed from the rest of the internal organs, and placed on a towel-draped tray for a nurse to take to the pathology laboratory. At least he was the right kind of problem to have at 3 o'clock in the morning, the surgeon remarks as he closes the incision. I don't think he'll be giving you any more trouble with that thing out. We don't need any more trouble, Hal says. We've got a house full tonight. If you're finished here, I'll go back to see if I can help Mike. 4:30 a.m. The fog-shrouded city still sleeps, but more floors of Baby's hospital are now flooded with light. On the 8th floor, young student nurses sit in rockers, feeding infants from bottles, weighing them, changing them, and putting them back into their cribs. We try to get the little ones fed this early, explains the floor nurse, so that we can concentrate on the older children later. If we don't have to disturb them for treatments or tests, a lot of them will sleep right through until 6 in the morning. Not all, however, and here now is Mitch, wide awake, bright-eyed, and full of glee. 4-year-old, 6 weeks post-op from an open-heart operation that repaired a faulty valve in his heart. He has been in and out of Baby's hospital for treatment all his life. We all would know Mitch if we were blindfolded, says one of the staff nurses. He's one of the cutest kids we've ever had here. Mitch, you imp, go to sleep. Grinning, Mitch points to his blanket-covered feet. All right, says the nurse resignedly. I'll get the doctor to look at them. To a young medical student, she says, Mitch wants you. He says his feet are bothering him. His feet, says the student, puzzled. What's wrong with them? He pulls back the covers and recoils in horror at the sight of 2 enormously swollen purple feet, tipped with red and yellow toes, and made of rubber. Then, along with nurse and a delighted Mitch, he bursts into laughter. 7 a.m. Shall I wake him up, doctor? On the 6th floor, the special nurse at the bedside of Billy, the boy with cystic fibrosis, has risen to greet the chief resident, who is red-eyed from a sleepless night, but still going from floor to floor to check his trouble cases. No, let him alone. He pats the respirator pump, which is still filling the room with its bellows-like rhythm. I think that the thing did the trick. He's going to make it this time. How is your meningitis baby, doctor? The nurse asks. Gone, the resident says flatly. About 30 minutes ago, we fought like hell all night, but it was too late. The respiration center in his brain must have been affected. He went progressively downhill and then just quit breathing. But that baby with the bile problems is better. I don't think we're going to have to do a blood transfusion. His liver is starting to function. You can reach me on the page if you want me. I'm going down to get some breakfast. On this night now ending, the case of little Trevor's gone after only 28 days of life must be placed in the losing column in the ceaseless battle that goes on night and day at Babies Hospital and similar hospitals throughout the U.S., which are dedicated to saving the lives and restoring the health of infants and children. But just a few days later, a child with the same disease that afflicted Trevor's was almost miraculously saved by the hospital's efforts. The terrible death rates among infants and children of a few decades ago are a thing of the past. Most of the great child-killing diseases are now conquered daily. Many maiming ailments which formerly condemned children to lives of tragedy and bitter frustration can be dealt with. A pediatrician who led Babies Hospital through its early struggles once observed, "It is not pleasant, of course, to have a dozen babies sent to us who die within 24 hours, but our reward may be possibly to save the 13th baby." Today, 75 years later, the reward of the doctors, nurses, scientists, and others who serve at Babies Hospital is not to save the life of the 13th baby, but the lives of most of the children who are admitted to this hospital, and to send thousands more out to lead normal, happy lives filled with love and laughter. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to this article of medical workers working a graveyard shift in a hospital in the year of 1964. Again, this article was published in Good Housekeeping in June of 1964 and written by Yvonne McLeod Wiley. Appreciate you all stopping by and taking the time to listen to this story. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my other content. You guys have a wonderful day. Thank you again for listening. Bye-bye.